You know how some people can charm you completely at first? When you date a narcissist, that's exactly how it starts. But behind that charm, there's manipulation and emotional abuse. He'll gaslight you till you question your own reality. You end up confused and drained. That's exactly what happened to me. I found myself in an abusive relationship where he kept control through a perfect mix of attention, guilt, and just enough affection to keep me hooked. I used to think I was too experienced to fall for this, but the truth is, even the most self-aware people can get caught up in a dynamic like this. The charm, the connection, it all feels so real at first. Today's video is about what happened and how I survived it, and how this nightmare experience transformed not just my life, but my entire approach to relationships. We met through one of the dating apps. On our first date, it felt like we had this magical connection, deep, meaningful conversations that lasted for hours. At first, it seemed like I'd found a once-in-a-billion connection. And for many of us, especially those of us who came out later or didn't have many relationship models when growing up, it's so tempting to ignore the warning signs when we finally find that connection. But looking back, the signs were everywhere. I just couldn't see them through his charm. If any of what I'm about to share sounds familiar from your own relationship, please listen carefully. These are serious red flags, and later in this video, we'll talk about how to handle them. And since we're talking about gay dating and relationships, check out my private newsletter, where I share insights you won't find anywhere else. The link is in the description. Now, let's talk about what happened next. He was a master at giving the feeling we're so wonderfully connected, with deep conversations and the way he seemed to just get me. But after a few weeks, something started to shift in his attitude, and if I said or did something even slightly wrong, he would shut down completely, giving me a whole day of silence and coldness. Since we were not living in the same city, when he came to stay at my place for a couple of weeks, I found myself constantly running around, getting him things and trying to make sure he's comfortable. But he would constantly complain about how I didn't host him well and spinning innocent things into proof of how I hurt him. When I suggested we could just talk openly about our needs and wants like couples do, he'd say, if I were a good partner, I should have known what he needed without asking. Which, looking back, makes no sense considering we barely knew each other and had never lived together before. Oh, and if you're wondering about my needs in all this, they never mattered. He'd always turn the conversation back to how I wasn't meeting his needs. In his world, everything was my fault. Every argument, every misunderstanding, every bad mood he had, somehow he could prove in a very convincing way how it all traced back to something I did wrong. Whenever I try to express how what he's doing or saying hurts me, he'd immediately turn it around to how I had hurt him first. My feelings were not even important enough to acknowledge. Now, deep down, I did feel something was wrong here, but I had so much empathy for him and I kept making excuses for his behavior. I was trying to understand where he was coming from, even if it hurt me. And he was just so good at manipulation. He had this way of explaining things that made his twisted reality feel like the absolute truth. I'd end up doubting my own feelings, thinking maybe I was too sensitive or not understanding enough. And looking back, what kept me stuck wasn't just his manipulation. It was my own belief that if I had just figured out the right way to communicate or to be more understanding, to meet his needs better, maybe things will finally get better. That's the real trap. If any of this sounds familiar, if you're constantly walking on eggshells, always apologizing, or feeling like nothing you do is ever enough, you might be dealing with a narcissist too. And I know that's a strong word to use. I wanted to make one thing clear. Our job isn't to diagnose if someone has a personality disorder. We're not qualified for that anyway. Our job is to protect ourselves from manipulation and unhealthy relationship dynamics. So, back to the story. Eventually, things reached a breaking point. His charm started wearing thin, and I began seeing through the manipulation. I think he sensed that I was pulling back, so he realized wasn't working. We had some difficult conversations. We both still saw the good in each other, and we valued the deep connection we had. We agreed to end the romantic relationship, but said we'd try to remain friends. But right after he left, he messaged me that he didn't want any contact and would block me on all social media. Here's the thing about that sudden cutoff. It happens a lot with people who are emotionally manipulative. They often disappear completely once they realize they can't control the situation anymore. When they can't get what they want from the relationship, they vanish, as if all that special connection never existed. If any of this sounds familiar, or if you're dealing with something similar in your own relationship right now, there might be a bigger purpose to what you're going through. Here's how this difficult experience totally transformed the way I approach relationships and even how I approach myself. After it ended, I felt confused and heartbroken, but something really clicked for me when I realized this didn't just randomly happen to me. There was something in how I think, feel, and behave that made it possible for these unhealthy dynamics to develop between us. The way we grew up affects how we connect with people now. When certain relationship patterns feel familiar, even if they're not good for us, we might be drawn to them without realizing why. It's like things that happened to us when we were kids, or the kind of relationships that we saw around us growing up. They create this pattern that shows up in our relationships later. And that was me. I had patterns I didn't even know about. This realization started me on a journey to understand what was really going on inside me and heal the wounds that kept showing up in my relationships. Today, I'm in a completely different place. If I met someone like him today, they wouldn't last a week with me. I simply wouldn't tolerate these kinds of behaviors anymore. If someone expected me to magically know what their needs without expressing them or belittle my needs, I wouldn't accept it. Open and direct communication is a non-negotiable for me now. If someone tried stonewalling me for a day over something minor, I'd make it clear that's not okay. And if they continued, well, clearly they're not a match. By the way, these two behaviors, expecting others to read their minds and using stonewalling to control or punish, you'd see them a lot in people who have a hard time managing their emotions and communicating their needs, including those with narcissistic traits. They do it probably because they want to feel in control, but they don't know how to express themselves in a healthy way. If you notice these patterns happening over and over, especially during conflicts, take it as a serious red flag. And here's what's amazing. Once I learned to have clear boundaries and stop tolerating when people cross them, everything changed. I started attracting and connecting with people who had much healthier relationships with themselves and others. The relationship that I'm in now, it's like night and day compared to that toxic one. Finally, I experienced what healthy communication feels like. We could talk about our needs directly, without drama and with real respect for each other's feelings. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what makes someone act the way he did. And I've learned that these behaviors can start from childhood wounds. When someone grows up with a deeply damaged sense of self-worth, this is how it can show up in their adult relationships. But here's the thing. Understanding that doesn't mean we should excuse their behavior, and it definitely doesn't mean we should try to fix them. Be careful if they seem to expect you to heal them, or if you catch yourself wanting to. That's a dangerous trap because no matter how much love, patience, or kindness you give, it won't change someone who isn't serious about doing the inner work. You are not their therapist, and your role isn't to heal them. Until they take responsibility for their own healing, there's a good chance their relationships will stay unhealthy. And you get to decide whether you want to wait around for that to happen. At the end of the day, you deserve someone who can meet you at the level of emotional maturity that you're at. Someone who can communicate clearly, respect your boundaries, and treat your feelings as valid as their own. This experience taught me that, and I hope sharing my story helps you see it too. Remember, no matter how many times we've been burned, real love is still possible. Healthy relationships exist. And if you're watching this, it means you're already on the right path because you're choosing to grow. And that choice will change everything. Be sure to like and subscribe to this channel for more, and see you in the next video. Love you all.